Emma Clark had always loved the quiet rhythm of her life. Her mornings were peaceful coffee, sketchpad, and the soft hum of rain outside her Portland apartment. She liked solitude. It made sense to her. After her last relationship ended, she promised herself she wouldn't depend on anyone again. But that changed one Sunday morning when a moving truck blocked her driveway. And a man she had never seen before appeared with a smile that felt both confident and kind. His name was Ethan Brooks, and from that first moment, something about him broke through the quiet world she had built around herself. He was new in the neighborhood, just moved in from Seattle, carrying boxes labeled kitchen stuff and memories. He apologized quickly for blocking her car, his voice low and warm. "I'll move it right away," he said, brushing a bit of dust off his jeans. Emma, caught off guard by his polite tone, simply nodded and said, "It's okay. Welcome to the neighborhood." She walked back to her porch, pretending to check her phone, but her eyes drifted toward him as he carried box after box into his new home. There was something comforting about his presence and ease in the way he worked. The quiet focus, the occasional laugh to himself when he nearly dropped something. That evening, as the sun fell behind the rooftops, she noticed lights flickering from his kitchen. The faint sound of music traveled through the thin walls and old songs she hadn't heard in years. It made her smile without realizing it. Over the next few days, small moments kept pulling their lives closer. He waved whenever he saw her outside watering her plants. Once, he returned her mail that had been placed in his box by mistake. "You've got great taste in catalogs," he joked, holding out an art magazine. She laughed, a real one, something she hadn't done easily in months. Soon their small talks became part of her routine. He asked about her art, her favorite coffee, and why she always wore her hair tied up when she painted. She learned he worked in architecture, but lately he'd been more focused on designing his life than buildings. There was no flirting, not really, just genuine interest. But under those quiet exchanges, something unspoken began to grow. Emma could feel it in the way his voice softened when he said her name, and in how her heartbeat quickened whenever she heard his footsteps next door. For weeks, they stayed in that careful space, close enough to feel warmth, far enough not to cross lines. It was safe, simple, and almost perfect. But fate rarely stays still. One evening, the city was swallowed by rain. The sky darkened early, thunder rolled over the hills, and the lights in the neighborhood suddenly went out. Emma sat in her living room, surrounded by the glow of her phone's flashlight, trying to distract herself with her sketchbook. The rain grew heavier, and the world outside turned completely black. Just then, a soft knock echoed at her door. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she heard his voice. "Emma, you okay in there?" She opened the door, and there he was, Jethan, standing with a small camping lantern in one hand and 2 steaming mugs in the other. His hair was damp, his jacket soaked at the shoulders, but his smile was steady and warm. "Power's out on the whole block," he said. "I figured you could use some light. And maybe coffee?" She stepped aside without thinking, motioning for him to come in. The lantern filled her small living room with a soft golden glow. He set the mugs on the table, and they sat together on the couch, listening to the rain beat against the windows. The world outside was dark and wild, but inside everything felt strangely peaceful. Ethan looked around her home, the paintings leaning against the wall, the half-finished sketches on her desk, the small potted plants by the window. "You live beautifully," he said quietly. It wasn't flattery. It sounded like admiration. She smiled shyly. "It's messy," she replied. "But it's mine." They talked for hours about art, travel, music, and the kind of loneliness that comes from trying to move on. He told her he'd left his last job because it made him feel invisible. She shared how she once gave up painting for almost a year because love had made her forget who she was. The honesty between them was effortless, and every sentence felt like a step closer to something neither of them had planned. Outside, the rain eased. The room grew quieter, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Emma watched the candlelight flicker across his face. He caught her gaze and smiled. Not the way people smile at neighbors, but like someone who understood her silence. "You know," he said softly, "I think storms are good for something. They make people slow down long enough to notice what matters." Her heart trembled at his words. There was no need for a reply, just the sound of the rain, the faint crackle of a candle, and the warmth of two people who had found unexpected comfort in each other's company. When the lights finally flickered back on, neither of them moved. The world had power again, but they stayed in that small golden circle of quiet understanding. He stood, stretching lightly. "Guess I should let you rest," he said. She nodded, but didn't want the moment to end. As he reached the door, she said softly, "Thank you." "For the light." He paused, turned back with that calm smile, and said, "Any time, neighbor." After he left, Emma sat alone, her heart still warm. The rain had stopped, but something inside her had begun to stir, something hopeful, alive, and quietly terrifying. She realized she wasn't just thankful for the light he brought into the room, but the one he'd somehow brought back into her life. From that night onward, things changed. Mornings began with coffee shared on the porch steps. Evenings ended with laughter across the fence. He wasn't just her neighbor anymore. He had become a part of her days, a steady presence that made life feel less heavy. Still, neither of them said what was growing between them. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe it was too precious to risk. But deep down, Emma knew something was shifting. Every glance held meaning. Every small touch, passing a mug, brushing shoulders, carried sparks neither could ignore. It wasn't a love story yet, not officially, but it was the start of one, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't demand, just waits quietly for the right moment. And when that moment finally came, she would remember the rain, the candlelight, and the neighbor who had knocked on her door with coffee and warmth on a dark night. That night, when Emma finally went to bed, she looked toward the wall that separated their homes. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. The world outside was calm. The air still carried the scent of rain, and somewhere next door, Ethan's soft laughter echoed faintly through the walls, like a promise she didn't yet understand but already believed in. That was the night Emma Clark started to believe again in blessings, because sometimes they don't come from heaven. Sometimes they move in right next door. The storm from that night had passed, but something between Emma and Ethan had quietly changed. They didn't talk about it, but they both felt it. The air seemed different whenever they met soft door, charged with something unspoken. What started as polite, neighborly friendship now carried a warmth that neither could name. The morning after the blackout, Ethan appeared at her door again, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this to recover from the power outage," he said with that easy grin. She laughed, took the cup, and for the first time in months, her morning didn't feel lonely. Days turned into a comfortable pattern. They began to share little rituals: coffee on her porch before work, evening walks with his dog, and short talks that often stretched into hours. Emma found herself waiting for the sound of his footsteps next door, and he always found excuses to check in. Sometimes he'd help fix something small around her house. Sometimes she'd bring him muffins fresh from the oven. Everything felt light, natural, effortless. That one evening, the rain returned, light and rhythmic against the windows. Ethan knocked, holding a movie DVD in one hand and his dog tugging the leash in the other. "I thought maybe we could have a movie night. Since the last storm brought good luck." Emma smiled and let him in. They sat on the couch, sharing popcorn and quiet laughter as the movie played. His dog curled at their feet, the light flickered, and for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Halfway through, Ethan said softly, "You know, I don't think I've felt this calm in years." Emma turned to look at him. "Why?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because life feels normal again. Not perfect. Not easy. Just real." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That one sentence said everything she'd been feeling too. Their conversations grew more personal after that. They shared stories about their pasts, their heartbreaks, their regrets, their small victories. Emma told him about the fiancé she once thought she'd marry, and how that dream ended without warning. Ethan confessed that he'd left a long relationship that had slowly faded until it felt like silence. There was no bitterness in their words, only honesty. And in that honesty, they found understanding. Sometimes, when she painted in the evenings, he'd sit nearby with his guitar, strumming softly while she worked. The mix of paint, coffee, and music filled the space between them. They didn't talk much during those moments, but it felt complete. The silence wasn't empty any, where it was warm, alive. As weeks passed, people around the neighborhood began to notice. "You two are always together," one neighbor said with a playful grin. Ethan laughed it off, but when he caught Emma's eyes, he felt something twist inside him. Later that night, as they stood by the fence separating their yards, "Shh," she said with a small smile, "we're giving them something to talk about." He chuckled, leaning on the wooden rail. "Maybe they're not wrong," he said quietly. Emma froze for a second, unsure how to respond. His tone wasn't teasing. It was gentle, sincere. But before she could speak, he added, "You've made this place feel like home." Then he smiled, wished her good night, and went inside, leaving her heart fluttering like wind against glass. From then on, it became harder to pretend their connection was simple. Every time she saw him, every time his hand brushed hers, something deep inside her stirred. It wasn't sudden. It was steady, like a light slowly turning on. Yet neither of them dared to name it. Maybe because naming it might change it. One night they sat outside under the stars, sharing coffee again. "Do you ever feel," Ethan said, "like you're standing at the start of something, but you're scared to move forward?" Emma thought for a long moment. "Yes," she whispered, "all the time." Their eyes met, and for a brief second, time felt still. The distance between them was small, but heavy with meaning. Then his dog barked suddenly, breaking the moment. They both laughed awkwardly, grateful for the interruption, yet secretly disappointed. After he left, Emma lay awake for hours, thinking about his words. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall again, but life didn't always listen to promises. The next morning, she found a small note stuck under her door. It was from Ethan. "Thanks for last night," it said. "I needed that talk. You make everything feel lighter." She smiled and tucked the note into her sketchbook like a secret. She didn't reply, but later that day, she slipped a doodle of his dog into his mailbox with the words, "For your loyal friend, from your neighbor." That simple exchange became their language. Notes, drawings, small gifts. Small gifts, Sit was their way of saying what words couldn't. He'd leave her a flower from his garden. She'd bake him cookies. He'd drop by to fix a broken hinge. And she'd end up painting him while pretending it was just practice. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments that made everyday life beautiful. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan stopped by, looking thoughtful. "Emma, can I tell you something strange?" he asked. She nodded. "I moved here thinking I just needed a new start. But lately, it feels like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." His eyes were steady, and though he didn't say the word love, she heard it in the silence that followed. She looked away, her heart racing. "Maybe it's just the new neighborhood," she said lightly, trying to hide how much his words meant. He smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe it's the neighbor." For a moment, they both stood there, the world shrinking around them. It would have been so easy to take one step closer, but instead, they both turned away, scared to break what they already had. That night, she sat by her window, watching the faint glow of his lamp next door. She wondered if he was thinking about her, too. She didn't need to wonder for long. Her phone buzzed with a message. "You awake?" "Yes, can't sleep." "Too many thoughts." "Same. At least we're bad sleepers together." She smiled. Typing back, "Good neighbors don't let each other feel alone." His reply came quickly. "Then I'm lucky to have one like you." Emma placed her phone down, her heart full and confused all at once. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. But it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, some bonds are meant to grow quietly before they bloom. Over the following weeks, life felt brighter. They still acted like friends, neighbors, sharing moments, but there was always that quiet, beautiful tension between them. Every smile felt like a question. Every goodbye felt a little too long. Emma didn't know where this was heading, and maybe Ethan didn't either. But deep down, both knew something special had begun. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simple, real, and full of quiet hope. And somewhere between coffee mugs, laughter, and late-night talks, Emma Clark began to realize that blessings don't always come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes they knock on your door, borrow your sugar, and teach you how to believe again in the small, gentle kind of love. Time had moved quietly, the way it does when life feels almost right. Emma and Ethan had fallen into an easy rhythm morning coffee. Shared jokes, long conversations that drifted between dreams and confessions. Their friendship had become the soft center of both their lives. But life, as always, had other plans. One afternoon, Ethan showed up at her door holding a letter. His face carried a strange mix of excitement and hesitation. "I got an offer," he said, voice uncertain. "It's a design project in Seattle. It's big, Emma. The kind of thing I've been hoping for." For a moment, she didn't know how to react. She smiled, trying to sound cheerful. "That's amazing. You deserve it." But behind her smile, her heart felt heavy. The word Seattle echoed in her mind like a quiet warning. Over the next few days, the air between them changed. They still talked, still laughed, but something invisible hung in the silence between words. Ethan tried to act normal, and Emma did her best to hide the ache that came with the thought of him leaving. Every moment together suddenly felt temporary. It's like sand slipping through fingers. One evening, a week before he was set to leave, they met at her backyard as the sky turned golden. She had invited him for dinner, nothing fancy. Just pasta and laughter, but underneath it all, both knew it felt like a goodbye they weren't ready to admit as they ate. Ethan looked around at her garden, the soft glow of string lights, the scent of lavender in the air. "I'm going to miss this place," he said. She smiled faintly. "It'll miss you too." He looked at her, his eyes steady but sad. "You've been the best part of moving here, Emma. You know that, right?" Her throat tightened. "I'm just your neighbor," she said softly, but the words felt weak, false. "You're more than that," he replied. And then, before she could ask what he meant, he looked away. The conversation drifted after that, replaced by comfortable silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. When he left that night, she stood by the fence long after he was gone, staring at the small space that separated their homes. It suddenly felt wider than ever. The following days passed too fast. Emma tried to focus on work, but her thoughts kept circling back to him, his smile, his voice, his small kindnesses. Every sound from next door reminded her that soon there would be nothing but silence. She wanted to tell him how she felt, but fear held her back. What if he didn't feel the same? What if it ruined everything? The morning he was supposed to leave, she saw the moving truck in front of his house. Her heart sank. She watched from her window as he loaded the last box. He looked up once, saw her, and smiled. It was a small, gentle smile, one that carried gratitude and something more. Something unspoken. She waved back, forcing a smile of her own. Then he was gone. That evening the neighborhood felt empty. The soft sound of his guitar, the smell of his coffee, even the bark of his dog, everything that had filled her days was missing. Emma sat on her porch, staring at the empty driveway next door. It amazed her how quickly someone could become part of your world and how suddenly that world could change. The first week without him was the hardest. She tried to stay busy, painting late into the night, cooking meals for one, pretending the silence didn't bother her. But every corner of her house seemed to echo his memory. Sometimes she caught herself smiling at nothing, remembering something he had said. Other times she felt that quiet ache return, heavy and familiar. Then, one night, as she worked on a new painting, her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with his name. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before opening the message. "Hey, neighbor. Seattle's nice, but not as warm as home." She smiled, typing back. "Glad you're settling in. Don't forget to water your plants." A few seconds later, his reply came. "I miss your garden. And our coffee talks, actually, I miss a lot more than that." Her breath caught. She stared at the words, unsure what to say. Finally, she typed, "Some people are hard to replace." He replied instantly. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her heart was full of hope, confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to love. Maybe distance didn't always mean an ending. Maybe it was just another way to understand what someone really meant to you. Over the next few weeks, they talked often. Video calls, late night texts, photos of little things, a new cafe he found, her latest painting, a sunrise he thought she'd like. Their bond only grew stronger. But with every call, she missed him more. The distance made the feelings clearer. She wasn't just fond of him. She loved him. One night during one of their calls, Ethan said quietly, "You know, I never meant to stay away this long. The city's great, but it doesn't feel like home without you." Her heart trembled. "Maybe you just miss your neighbor," she said, trying to smile. He shook his head. "No, Emma, I miss you." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with emotion, even through the screen. Then he said softly, "Can I tell you something? When I left, I thought I was chasing opportunity. But now I realize I was leaving behind the one thing that felt right. You're impossible to replace." Emma blinked back tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he replied, "I don't want to just be your neighbor anymore. I want to be the reason you smile in the morning." Her eyes filled. "Then come back," she whispered. He smiled. "I'm working on it." After that night, their messages carried a new warmth, hope, mixed with longing. The days felt lighter. She started painting again, but this time every color she used seemed brighter. She had found her inspiration again, him. A few weeks later, a knock came at her door one chilly evening. She opened it, expecting a delivery, but her heart froze when she saw who stood there. Ethan, he was smiling, his hair slightly messy, suitcase by his side. "Told you I was working on it," he said. Emma stared, half in shock, half in disbelief. "You're back." "Seattle can wait," he said, "but I couldn't wait any longer." She didn't move at first. Then she laughed a bright, tearful laugh and stepped forward to hug him. It wasn't dramatic or movie-like. It was real, gentle, and full of everything they hadn't said before. When they pulled back, he looked into her eyes. "You once told me good neighbors are blessings," he said quietly. "You were right. But I think I found something even better." Emma smiled through her tears. "What's that?" He grinned softly. "A reason to stay." That night, as they sat side by side on her porch, watching the stars return, Emma realized something simple yet powerful. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly through shared coffee, rainy nights, and one good neighbor who turns into something much more. And in that moment, under the soft hum of the city, Emma finally understood that blessings aren't always about luck. Sometimes they're about timing and the courage to open the door when someone knocks. Autumn had arrived in Portland, painting the streets with gold and copper leaves. And Emma felt the crisp air differently this year. Her days had regained rhythm with Ethan gone for a while, but every morning her thoughts wandered next door. She missed him in ways she hadn't expected, and each small sound, the bark of his dog, the hum of a car passing, reminded her of him. Then, one evening, the knock came that changed everything. She opened her door and froze. There he was, standing with a small plant in his hands, smiling softly, as if the months apart had never existed. "I thought you might like this for your porch," Ethan said, holding the plant carefully. "So you don't forget your neighbor again." His words made her laugh softly, the sound warm and familiar. She didn't even need to respond with more than a smile. The silence between them carried years of shared laughter, quiet moments, and unspoken feelings. It was strange how comfortable it felt to see him again, how natural it seemed to let him step into her home without asking. They spent the evening catching up, talking about Seattle, her latest art projects, and even the little things that had happened while he was away. Every sentence carried a weight of emotion neither wanted to say aloud. His presence brought back warmth to her life, the kind that had been missing when he left. Emma noticed how he still watched her carefully, like he was memorizing each gesture, each smile. There was no rush, no dramatic confessions, just the quiet comfort of being with someone who truly understood her. As the night grew darker, they moved outside, sitting on the small porch with their feet brushing against the chilly wood. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like tiny lights guiding them. Ethan leaned back, the plant between his knees, and smiled at her. "You know," he said, his voice gentle, "people always talk about good neighbors being blessings." Emma looked at him, curious, waiting for the end of the thought. "And I've found one," he continued, "who brings me laughter, comfort, and, well, more than I ever expected." She felt a warmth rush to her chest. It wasn't a declaration of love, not in the grand dramatic sense, but it was a promise, subtle and steady. It was exactly what she had been longing for at the realization that he was hers. Not because they needed each other, but because they wanted to be together. Emma laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't know neighbors could come with benefits like that." She teased lightly, her tone masking the emotional weight in her heart. Ethan chuckled, reaching over to tuck a loose leaf from the plant into the soil. His hand brushed hers briefly, and that small contact sent a spark through her chest, the kind that makes quiet hearts skip a beat. They stayed there for hours, talking and sharing memories of the time they had spent apart. They laughed at the small misunderstandings, the awkward pauses in their video calls, and the silly notes they had left for each other. The comfort between them had grown deeper now. No longer just friendship, but something tender. Something that had quietly transformed into love. Every look, every touch, every word carried meaning, even when left unspoken. The world outside seemed to fade. The city noises, the rustling leaves, even the occasional passerby felt distant. It was just the two of them, sharing a moment that had been months in the making. Emma realized how much she had missed the shared laughter. The gentle teasing, the feeling of someone understanding the parts of her that she kept hidden. Ethan had become more than a neighbor. He had become her anchor, her quiet joy, the person she had unconsciously been waiting for. As the evening drew on, Ethan placed the plant carefully on her porch table and turned to her. "Emma," he said softly, "I know I left for a while and things changed. But I came back because this us, it's too important to ignore." Her heart ached with happiness. She took a step closer, feeling the cool night air and the warmth of his presence blending together. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. He smiled, reaching out to tuck her hair behind her ear, a small, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. "I've missed this," he admitted. "Missed you." Her breath caught. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes, her smile, the subtle tilt of her head said everything. For months they had both been careful, holding back feelings, afraid to cross the invisible line between friendship and something more. Now, the line no longer existed. They didn't need words to define what had grown between them. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation and shared silences. They reminisced about the first time they met, the blackout night that had started it all, and the small gestures that had built their connection. Every memory reminded them of how far they had come, how much they meant to each other, and how patient love could be, growing quietly until it was ready to bloom. At one point, Ethan leaned back, watching the stars. "I never thought a neighbor could change my life," he said. "But you did." Quietly, slowly, and completely. Emma's eyes glistened. "I guess I never thought a neighbor could become everything either," she replied. They sat together, the cold autumn air brushing against them, yet feeling warm in each other's company. The small porch had become a private world where time slowed, where they could be themselves without masks or pretenses. It was real, steady, and perfect in its simplicity. Eventually, the night grew late, and they knew it was time to go inside. But even as they stepped back into the warmth of her home, the feeling of closeness lingered. Emma realized something important. Love didn't have to be loud, dramatic, or perfect. It could arrive quietly, like a knock on the door, a cup of coffee, or a shared smile on a rainy night. It could be subtle, gentle, and still profound. As they prepared to part for the night, Ethan looked at her one last time. "You've made my life brighter, Emma, more than I can explain." She smiled, feeling a tear threaten to fall. "And you've made mine full again," she whispered. He nodded, finally understanding that some things didn't need to be spoken to be felt. The bond between them was no longer just neighborly, it was a connection of hearts, patient and deep, built on trust, care, and quiet love. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about the months of waiting, the distance, and the uncertainty. And yet everything had led to this moment. The plant on her porch wasn't just green area, it was a symbol of what they had grown together. A reminder that blessings sometimes come quietly, knocking on your door, carrying warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that doesn't shout but quietly fills your soul. From that evening forward, the line between neighbor and something more disappeared entirely. Emma and Ethan's story didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was built on shared mornings, laughter in the evenings, small gifts, and gentle words that meant everything. Life felt fuller, brighter, and infinitely sweeter. And for Emma, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the greatest blessings aren't far away. They live right next door. And in that warmth, under the golden autumn leaves and quiet city lights, Emma Clark finally understood the beauty of love that waits patiently, grows quietly, and turns a simple neighborly bond into a lifetime of happiness.